Today we have a fascinating discussion in store for you. This is something that is close to our heart and our programs. We want to get back to our local community. We want to get back to our neighbors. And one of the things that makes that a reality is when you can have access to local food or perhaps grow it yourself. And that's what we have with us today, a farmer, someone who is focused on food freedom and innovation. He is the founder of the Rogue Food Conference, John Moody. How you doing, sir?
Great. How are you today, David?
It's so great to have you on, and it's a great, beautiful backdrop you have there. And again, you got a great green screen. I don't know how you do it, but I can't even see the clipping on your ears when you're.
Oh, it's nice to be able to be outside.
Yeah. So, so John, tell us a little bit about your background for those who are not familiar with you. You and Joel Salatin do a lot of great things all over the country to spread the message of regenerative agriculture and local food production. But let's just start with you and your story. What's your background here?
Oh, goodness. So my family thinks I was abducted by aliens because had you met me as a kid in the 80s or a high school college student in the 90s, this would not have been your imagined green screen. Ready Player One would have been more what you would have thought the background would have been. So
We're
I
going to
grew
be a
up in,
video game developer making Tetris.
no, I'd probably just be a video game player, unfortunately. So I grew up in Northeast Ohio originally. Um, I was your typical child of the 1980s, 1990s, processed cereal eating, video game playing, cartoon watching kid. And so when I was in college, the Lord saved me and I began to go to church and other things. And that ended up me going to seminary. In college, I majored in business finance, mathematics, economics. So that was my academic background forever ago. My local church sent me to seminary to be trained as a pastor. And when I was in seminary, I almost died. There's really no other way to describe it. I got down below 120 pounds on a 6'2" frame. So I should have became a bank robber because I could turn sideways and I just disappear. I was so thin. So I'm in seminary. I'm horribly, horribly ill. And I go to my doctor, and the doctor looks at me and he says, he goes, this is normal. I
Mhm.
go, what do you mean this is normal? I'm 23, 24 years old. What 23-year-old had, and he's like, well, lots of people have ulcers at your age, have digestive issues at your age. And I'm just sitting here going, how is this normal that that people in their 20s are, and he's like, it's no big deal. We can just put you on this medication. I'm like, okay. Like, well, what does this medication do? And he pauses for a moment. He goes, let me check the drug insert. I'm like, wait, like you're about to give me a medication and you're not entirely sure how the medication even works. So he pulls out the drug insert, and it was like a Bugs Bunny cartoon where he opens it and it just keeps opening and opening. And the font is like .1 sans serif font. So he's trying to look through a thing. He's like, oh, this drug shuts down your body's ability to produce hydrochloric acid. And my first thought, which I didn't say out loud because I wanted medical help, not psychiatric help at the time, was I'm an Avenger. My body produces hydrochloric acid, the stuff that will eat through steel and stone. My body makes. The second thought, the one I said out loud, was if my body is designed to make this, what will happen when you make my body not be able to do something it was designed to do? And he stood there for a very long time. And he goes, no one has ever asked me this question. And he goes, honestly, he goes, I don't think I have ever thought about the body that way, ever. So I was able to heal my ulcers, because all doctors can offer you are pills and procedures. That's
Yeah.
basically what modern medicine has been
Mhm.
reduced to, is kind of a money-making hamster wheel where you go from one set of pills to one set of procedures, then back to another set of pills. So I got interested in the work of people like Sally Fallon and other people in traditional foods and people in regenerative agriculture. And over the course of a year, I was completely able to heal not just my duodenal ulcers, but things like seasonal allergies. I used to have seasonal allergies so bad that Benadryl sent me free stock options as a patronage dividend. I had, probably from when I was a kid through college, probably had easily, a dozen or more dental cavities. I haven't had a cavity now in 2 decades. So it was really neat to see that when you begin to understand how to, what actually is food and how it should be prepared, just how much your health will improve in so many different areas.
And so that led you to a health discovery. Now, how did you become a farmer? Were you an advocate first, or how did that
Yeah.
transition happen?
Yeah. So at the time, Jessica, now my wife, we were dating or engaged when I was pretty sick. And so we began to retool, how we ate as a couple and then as a family. And so we went from shopping at Kroger and Sam's Club to shopping at Wild Oats and Whole Paycheck. And because I had a background in economics and things like that, I was just like, man, like the stuff in these stores is really, really expensive, a lot of it. And it's just organic versions of the same junk as in the stores I was just shopping at. So you can eat Cheerios or you can eat organic Cheerios. You can eat seed oil potato chips or you can eat organic seed oil potato chips. But I'm like, there's a difference in price tag here, but there doesn't seem to be a significant difference in quality, especially quality when it comes to human health. And, at the time, I'm also researching the food system, researching the history of the food system. And I discovered farmers, when you shop at places like, Whole Foods or other places, they get 20 cents or less on the dollar of what consumers spend. So you can go look it up. It's called the USDA food dollar, and they track how much consumer spending actually makes it to the people who grow the food. And for
This is
decades
just
now,
for food. This is just for food spending, or
yeah,
all
this is
spending.
food spending. Well, it's food spending. So restaurants, anything related to the food system.
Okay.
So, but anything that comes from a farmer that's in the food system, but it's probably true for also like textiles and other things. The farmers get less than 20 cents on the dollar of what you spend at the store. So, I'm sitting here in a, Whole Foods and seeing that chicken breast that's not even from pastured chickens, it's like $11 a pound. And the farmer's getting $2 a pound at best. Like, where's the $9 going? Where's all the rest of the money? So in 2006, Jessica and I started the Whole Life Buying Club, which at this point is one of the oldest and one of the largest alternative local food systems in the country. And it just started with us and about 8 other families meeting every other week in our apartment to split up food I was getting from local farmers. And so we started with the buying club in 2006. By around 2009, we had over 100 member families. And by 2011, we had almost 200 member families. And then we got raided by the government.
Was that in the news? I think I might have seen this one. Was this one that got national attention? They all kind of blur together if you're not precisely following which Amish guy got his oats, oat soap rated, and which one got their. It's all kind of blends together.
Yeah, I don't know. Since I was in the middle of fighting the government, I did not pay attention to all of like the greater chattering, because I'm just trying to figure out, how do I not end up in jail? And can I successfully give these people a really big black eye? Because I don't know how much your listeners know, but starting around the mid 1990s, as interest in local food and traditional foods started to grow, the federal government began to pressure state and local governments to crack down on raw milk, local food, all kinds of things. Kristen Canty has a great documentary. I think she highlights, 8 or 9 different stories called Farmageddon. So a little bit of a cheesy name, but very, very good documentary where she highlights, there was Mark Baker, when the state of Michigan basically tried to make it illegal to raise hogs in anything other than a CAFO hog facility. So there's all these crazy stories.
Did he win that one?
They eventually did win. But it was, it was a real battle. So, but there's a farmer here in Kentucky who was raided by a SWAT team as he was delivering raw milk to northern Kentucky, to the suburbs of Cincinnati on the Kentucky side. Quite literally raided by a SWAT team in his delivery van. So just absolutely, insane. It even makes the insanity of right now seem, hey, it's just levels of insanity that boggle the mind, until you realize just how serious the corporations and their crony and government are in not allowing people any sort of choice with who they get food from.
And then what were they going after you about? Raw milk, or what was it?
Yeah, I mean, it was the cease and desist and quarantine orders were over raw milk primarily, but it was really just they don't like people having alternatives. So around 2013 or 14, I was asked by some people in Kentucky, hey, would you help us work on some legislation around food freedom in Kentucky? I said, hey, I'll give this one good faith effort to try and get a bill passed, even though I think this is a giant waste of time given the ineptitude and corruption of the Kentucky legislator. But I'll give you one good faith effort. So as part of this process of trying to get a bill passed, I was required to go to Frankfurt, one Thursday or whatever odd day of the week, to meet with other stakeholders who our bill would impact. So this is a behind closed door meeting in Frankfort, Kentucky, at the Capitol, in the governor's office of agricultural policy. So we're in this beautiful, ornate room that money was stolen from me and my family to build. And we're sitting down across from these guys who are part of industrial agriculture. So the door closes. A few pleasantries are exchanged. And then these guys look at us and they say, if you all do not drop your bill, bad things will happen to you. And so there's 3 of us, working on this bill together who went for this meeting. There's these couple guys from industrial ag in Kentucky. And one of my friends who is in the room, John Mark Hack, he looks at the one guy and he basically says, like, are you threatening us with physical harm? Because we want people and farmers to have a choice who they sell their product to. And the one dude from Industrial Ag, he got up and crossed the table, put his finger, right in our face. He was totally belligerent and threatening. And that's how serious these people are about their stranglehold on the food system. And it's just wild to me, because they've been,
this was a market player. This wasn't a government bureaucrat.
Well, this guy was somebody, so in most states in the 50s, 60s, early 70s passed PMOs, pasteurized milk ordinances. And so those pasteurized milk ordinances keep farmers in most states, especially until recently, from being able to offer milk to consumers without going through a pasteurization cooperative. And so this guy was somebody who oversaw the pasteurization cooperative system in Kentucky. So he oversaw 99.9% of all milk in Kentucky. Because if you're a farmer, it has to go through the PMO ordinance, so it has to go through the PMO system.
He's a good market capitalist, in other words. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, and here's how successful this guy's system has been.
Yeah.
When he became head of this system, look at Kentucky dairy farms in 2000. Around 1996 to 2000, Kentucky had over 8,000 dairy farms. At the time of this meeting, we had around 2014. Guess how many dairy farms Kentucky had?
How many?
800.
Yeah. How much? What's it at now?
I don't know. I haven't looked at the numbers recently. So these people, they oversee a failing system. It fails the farmers, and it's certainly looking around America at obesity and disease and so many other things. It fails consumers. So you have to ask the question, who benefits from this system? Like, who is the winner in the modern food system? Because if it's not consumers and it's not producers, who are the actual winners who keep up this status quo?
It would be the middlemen that are creating the industrial corporations that don't want competition, right?
Yeah. And it's the food handlers, the grocery stores, the distributors, the processors, the meat packers, who were all the news a couple years ago. If you look up the meat packing cartels and whatnot, and then it's their bureaucrats in government who they spend a number of years working for J.B. Smith or working for this or that major player in the food industry. And then they go spend a number of years working for the FDA or the USDA. And then they go back to the food industry, or they start a consulting company for the food industry after they leave government. And the amount of money these, it's like the normal head of the FDA is somebody who's an ex-head or a very high up from a company like Monsanto. And you just have to ask yourself, in what world, in what world would that ever happen in any kind of just and reasonable world?
Yeah. But people don't, people who have the power don't care about what's just and reasonable. They care about what's just for them, right? And that's just that's the nature of human depravity. I mean, you probably learned that in seminary, didn't you?
Oh yeah. Well, and this is why it's one thing
they couldn't care less. They, when they hear people like you and me talk about and even folks like Thomas Massey talk about principles, I put it like this: it's like listening to a fan of a wrestling show who's like, Undertaker, you're not if you're a dark wizard, how come you don't do that one spell? And you're like, kid, can you please shut up and go sit down in your seats? Like, That's what they think of us when we're like, but the principles of the Constitution. They're like, kid, please go get your popcorn and shut up. Like we don't
Yeah.
care about you. You're such a mark, is what they would say. You're such a
Oh yeah. Well, and that's why I learned when they raided us,
uh,
pieces of paper do not defend your rights and your communities from the deprivations of government and multinational corporations. It's the willingness to actually fight.
mhm.
So, and I think that's something that's really been lacking in libertarian conservative circles, is there's this idea that, well, we have the better principles, so certainly we will win. I'm like, nobody wins unless you fight. It doesn't matter how good your principles are, unless you're willing to actually press those principles and fight for them when it matters.
Mhm. Yeah, for sure. And it's something that, I think the battle of the 21st century is between the soil and the banks. It's it's like, can you get the soil healthy enough? If you can get the soil healthy enough, then the power of the banks and everything that goes with that whole system starts to diminish. So, it's a battle between those who would cultivate the land and those who would cultivate debt. And
You
that
sound like
really,
Thomas Jefferson
yeah.
versus Alexander Hamilton.
Yeah, I mean, but you look at it, and it's true though, because if you have weak soil, then you have a population that's completely nutritionally dependent or deficient, which means they're dependent on big pharma, and then they're going to need a big bank to facilitate big pharma dependency, and it goes from there. If you're not able to take care of your community at a local level, then of course you're dependent on these giant corporations, and you're dependent on giant wars to make sure the prices of certain chemical fertilizers and everything stay the right way, and prices of fuel, or depending on your economy, is dependent on these international agreements about currencies and oil and all this stuff. So you just get really tied up in that, and that's
Yeah.
where the mafia is.
Yeah. Oh, there's a great article for your readers. You can find an archived version. It's called "The Oil We Eat: Following the Food Chain Back to Iraq." And I read that, probably around 2006, 2007 when I came across that article, and I was just blown away.
Mhm.
The amount of energy that it takes to grow industrial crops, just I think in Iowa, he said, is the equivalent to multiple nuclear bombs every year just to grow crops in one state in America. It's and so he's like, you know, energy is a weapon, because our food system is now dependent upon our petroleum system, which is a completely new thing. It wasn't until the 1960s that agriculture was completely dependent upon petroleum prices. Because, and it's not just, and if you're listening, it's not just petroleum prices to run all of this heavy equipment that now dominates agriculture unnecessarily, but the vast majority of fertilizer used in agriculture is also made from petroleum products now.
Right.
And it's just madness. The air we breathe, I think, is 78% nitrogen. You can capture that nitrogen from the air to grow food in so many different ways. And instead, we're engaging in wars or all sorts of convoluted foreign policy nonsense to try and maintain a stable enough energy supply so that we can make nitrogen out of petroleum. It's like, come on, guys. How do you get here in any reasonable fashion?
Right. So what happened with that fight? Just did you win, apparently, or how did you do that?
Yeah, so we were the first group in the country to win.
And by group, you mean buyers clubs?
Well, anything.
Oh,
If you go look, like there was Rossum in California, which was some kind of hippie food community. there in California, raided twice by the government, once at gunpoint. You might still be able to find the videos on YouTube where these pudgy policemen are running into this hippie food club in California, pointing guns at kale and cabbage and broccoli like they're going to shoot back, you know?
They weren't littering the cabbage with bullets, were they? Good Lord.
No shots were fired, but it was almost comical to me when I see this kind of stuff. So, you know, Rossum was raided. They lost. Manna Storehouse up in Ohio, they were shut down. Athens Locally Grown, I believe, was another one down in Georgia, publicly made to dump out all of this milk on the ground on a roadside. Again, you can go see videos of all these things. So all of these farmers, all of these alternative food businesses just got the daylights kicked out of them over the course of many years. And, you know, we were raided. It was 2011, Memorial Day weekend, no less, which was a total gift to us, because the government raiding us on Memorial Day weekend was a beautiful rhetorical gift in terms of actually fighting back against them. And we were able to get the Kentucky government to, in writing, say, they wouldn't say it was a mistake. They basically said it was a misunderstanding and they did not currently have, you know, authority, legislative authority to mess with us. And so after a very long week, we walked away the victors. And ever since then, the state of Kentucky has been more gun shy to harass any alternative local food outfits.
Wow, that's great. So you can rest a little easy, or do you always feel a little bit like you know, Mission Impossible? You never know when the next dun 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 is going to happen on the farm.
You know, there are days where I'll sit here and I'll be like, I wonder if they're going to raid us again.
Is it always when it's just a little too peaceful? So
Yeah, something like that.
When you're drinking your sweet tea.
You know, it helps in Kentucky that we have quite a few legislators who they won't go to bat to make systemic improvements to the regulatory climate, but they also will kind of keep the health department from becoming too uppity. And then we have Thomas Massey at the national level, who anytime, you know, if the health department were to try and start harassing people, Massey would make their life a nightmare because he's going to magnify and publicize that everywhere he can. And so
Massey is the health freedom avenger of Kentucky, right?
Something like that. You know, it's good to have an ace in your pocket.
Yeah.
So
all you got to do is have drag queens do volunteer, farm
raw
work
milk
day,
distribution.
drag queen farm milk day, where they milk the cows and everything like that, and you'll be good for life. You'll be good for the next century in terms of no one's going to lay a finger on your farm.
Yeah,
they'll put it as a historically protected site or something like that. Yeah.
I'll just have my cows identify as trans cows.
There you go.
And that should cover all the woke points I need with the Kentucky government. Yeah, you know, so Kentucky has been, it's not a great state like Wyoming, North Dakota, or Maine, but it's an okay, or not, you know, Tennessee has also just been an incredible state for food freedom. And, you know, I'm hoping Florida's heading more and more that direction.
If we have any farmland left.
Yeah. So your population is heading the way of California.
Yeah.
So, yeah. So, but, you know, in the midst of all this, it's how I met Joel Salatin the first time. And Joel and I became friends for all sorts of reasons. We also purchased a 35-acre farm about an hour outside of Louisville, partly because I did not want to live in a city, but also partly, whoa, what has happened? Oh, good. My kids just bumped the computer. So like he disappeared. but also I'd have so many farmers in Kentucky tell me you couldn't do things. Like, well, you can't raise chickens on pasture. You can't raise cows that only eat grass. They just like, you can't do these things. I was like, let's find out if you're right. And that's one of the challenges in modern agriculture in America. It's you literally have an agricultural system that has only been the way it's been since the 50s and 60s. But everybody acts as if that is the way reality has been for all of human history. And so when you try and talk to a lot of people in agriculture, they really can't conceive of anything outside of this modern industrial model.
Right.
Where, we were driving home last night from Judo, and down the road from us, somebody is prepping a field by killing the field by mass spraying it with herbicides. And if you try and talk with them, you go like, this field could be grass and woodland where you raise pigs and cattle to get most of their to almost all of their own food, instead of killing the area and then replanting it to something that then you're going to feed to the cattle. Like, come on, guys.
Yeah, it's interesting. I was thinking of this quote I had for you before you brought that up, but it's a good time to read it, by Henry Ford. He was before this 1950s era, but he said, "To lift farm drudgery off flesh and blood and lay it on steel and motors has been my most constant ambition." Now, he had an axe to grind about farming, because he always talked about when he was a young man working on his dad's farm. He said it was just the drudgery, because he was all about efficiency. And he was like, look at how much you have to do for such little profit. And he was always thinking, with his machines, how could I automate and how could I use the power of machines to give humans a break so that you can have a more efficient way of getting a yield? And I think there's something good about that, but obviously that kind of reflected the mindset that ended up going in a different direction that has gotten us to the point we're at today, hasn't it, in some sense?
Yeah. Well, and obviously, when I speak at homesteading and farming conferences, I always make fun of people who do things dumb, needlessly.
Right.
But if Ford's goal was to make farmers more profitable through the use of machinery, it's been not just an utter failure, but economically it has been a catastrophe. The average farm in America now, so in Ford's day, farmers weren't rich, but his dad and his granddad still made a living without government handouts. Average farm income in America in most years is negative. So you can go look up the statistics. The average farm in America before government transfer payments has a net negative income through dependence upon mechanization and other things. So Ford might have been right that machinery could replace some of the drudgery of labor in farming, but it didn't help the economics.
Is there a way, because you and Joel Salatin do regenerative agriculture, which we haven't really got into yet, but is there a way to combine the back to nature, soil focus of what you guys are doing with some kind of outside the box technological innovations, maybe apps? I asked this to Joel, and he said, I don't even use the smartphone and apps, so don't ask me. But I'll ask you, maybe, since you're an 80s kid, you said, is there any way you could imagine using technology, whether it's, measuring soil or analyzing it? I don't know, just thinking outside the box in a way that might be, back to the future, where you're taking ancient principles, but you're combining it with future to have an advantage over the conventional framework that's not doing either.
My friend Michael Kilpatrick, he has a business called Growing Farmers. And he had a guy on his podcast recently that was all about the right use of technology to manage, farm type stuff better.
Yeah.
Because obviously, you know, when it comes to growing crops in terms of fertility, managing soil, managing, amending and fertilizing, all of that, if what gets measured gets improved, because that old adage in business, what gets measured is what gets better.
Yeah.
And so, apps and other technology that allow farmers to better keep track of their work and see in real time, well, this is what this was planted to last.
Yeah.
This, those kind of tools more and more farmers are using to better manage, intensive growing operations and other things.
Yeah.
But even Joel on his farm uses a number of technological solutions, but his are more using modern technology like dirt moving equipment to build ponds that permanently alter his farm in a beneficial way, because by holding water up on the mountains in polyface, you reduce flooding in the lowlands. And then during drought, you have all of this stored water above the pastures that can be released over time. And you basically make a new Garden of Eden through the proper use of technology to make permanent beneficial changes to landscapes.
Right.
So Joel's a big proponent of using technology that over time makes you less technologically dependent.
Right. Yeah.
I really like this principle. There's using technology in a way that long term makes technology your master, and there's using technology and tools in a way that long term make you the master.
Sure. Yeah. And which one? And the question is it a pro-human approach or an anti-human approach, and how that plays out, right? Because so much of our society seems to be rather anti-human in terms of its priorities. You and Joel have an event coming up May 12th, May 13th in Polyface, his farm in Virginia, the Rogue Food Conference. You could tell us a little bit about that, but also segueing this into just a general message to folks who are young, who are thinking, should I get in debt for $500,000 to have a shack near the city and be cool, or should I do homesteading? So with that in mind, tell us about your Rogue Food Conference.
Yeah, well, I'm going to answer the second one first. So there's never been more opportunity to no longer have to live in the city. So this is one of those things where, technology can be your slave. You can be a Twitter, Facebook, TikTok dopamine addict, where you're just constantly, doom scrolling or trying to keep up with the latest nonsense news. Or, I'm in middle of nowhere, rural Kentucky, hour outside of Louisville, and I have 25 meg up down internet speed, which means I can work from home. I can run a business from home and have a much lower cost of living, have a much better office view than anything you're going to get in a city, because of the right use of technology.
Yeah.
And so for young people who are thinking about their options, where they want to end up in the world, there's just all sorts of great opportunities now in not super rural areas, but just semi-rural areas, an hour and a half outside of places like Knoxville or Nashville or Columbia, Tennessee, or Louisville, Kentucky, where you'll still enjoy just a tremendous quality of life at a fraction of the cost.
Right.
And so Rogue was a real simple thing. Joel and I were having lunch probably around 2016, and we're having lunch because we're both speaking at a conference, and Joel looks at me and Joel goes, he goes, John, just once I want to go to a conference where instead of teaching me how to jump through the newest set of regulatory circus hoops that the government just erected, they teach me how to not comply. You know, and I look at Joel and I chuckle. I go, Joel, nobody is ever going to put this conference on, because in the agricultural world, pretty much all the conferences are sponsored by the government.
Yeah.
The money to make the conferences happens comes from
Yeah.
the government. They're not going to put on a conference telling you not how to, you know, or the money comes from the universities, and the money for the universities comes from the government. You know, I'm like, Joel, nobody's ever going to do this. Nobody's going to bite the hand that feeds them. And so Joel puts his thumbs in his suspenders and he hikes up his suspenders and he goes, we will. And if you know Joel, what Joel means by we will is Joel goes, I think you are the perfect person to do this. And I'm going to support it 1,000,000% in every single way possible. So we did the first Rogue Food in 2020, like 8 days before the first lockdowns for the Rona nonsense. We just snuck the first Rogue Food in. And this one at Polyface, I believe, is number 6.
Wow.
So will be our 6th Rogue Food. And we really focus on, you know, our motto is creative circumvention and non-compliance.
And what's the purpose for those who are not ideologically illumined about what would be another reason why one would want to do the non-compliance approach to homesteading or farming?
So a lot of people who come to Rogue aren't conservative libertarians, but they are people who are very concerned about a handful of multinational corporations and a couple billionaires wanting to force medicate them and their children through the food supply.
Right, right. That is a big issue. Well, John, I won't keep you. I know you're busy on the farm there. What's that behind you, by the way? Just that pile of things. Tell people what that is. What are we looking at here?
Oh, this is wood chips.
Okay. And
So,
what do you use those for?
you know, so you know, like let's talk about the difference in mindset. Most people, when they do a garden or grow food, they break out a tiller and they till the ground. When you till the ground, you cause loss of both carbon and nitrogen. So carbon is what makes soil black. It is what holds water. Basically, carbon is life. Nitrogen is your primary fertilizer in soil. So when you go to till your soil, you just destroyed your carbon and you just lost a bunch of your nitrogen by tilling it. You also killed the worms. You also destroyed all of the, you know, water and air holding capacity. And why do people till? Well, John, what do you do about weeds? Well, instead of tilling, we mulch with rotted wood chips, which add organic matter and fertility to the soil and feed the bugs and microbes that make soil healthy. And then they help capture more nitrogen from the air. And we don't need so much fertilizer or other things. And we don't need heavy equipment to grow food. So, you know, this big pile of wood chips will actually probably help us grow about 1,000 pounds of sweet potatoes.
Wow. That's fantastic. So tell us a little bit about what you grow, first of all, at your farm and while we have you.
Oh man, I mean, we raise chickens, pigs, eggs, elderberries, and then, you know, probably about 30 different flowers and vegetables, and then some other perennials and things.
You do fruit trees or anything?
We haven't done much fruit. So we've done, you know, we have elderberries and hazelnuts and raspberries and a few other kind of those. Our location is very hard to grow a lot of standard fruits in. We're surrounded in this area of Kentucky by cedar trees, and the trees contain a fungus that attacks apples and a whole bunch of other fruit bearing plants. So we've kind of focused on other stuff instead of fighting, the area we're in.
Yeah, that makes sense. That's a judo way of dealing with the land you're in, right?
Yeah. Well, it's funny because, I do homestead and farm consulting at times for people, and I'll meet somebody and they'll be like, I want to be a blueberry farmer.
Yeah.
I'm like, have you tested your soil? Your soil is as basic as a first grade math book in terms of the pH. And you're going to try and grow an acidic crop. You're going to be fighting your soil, So I always teach people, you need to think about where you're located and what is the most fitting, best use of your land.
Right.
Instead of trying to fight against it to make it do something that it's not made to do.
Do you do comprehensive soil tests to see how all the different minerals and trace minerals are?
Yeah, we do soil testing on our farm. Used to do it every year. We're down to probably every other year now for testing. And, it's amazing how well stuff grows when you get your soil right.
Right.
And how much more, not just the food is more nutritious, but the food is also more tasty.
Yeah.
And that's something, there's been good articles over the years about why is modern food so tasteless? And some of that is the varieties they're choosing, because their priorities are uniformity of ripening,
Right.
the ability to ship long distances. But part of it is as well, the nutrients in the soil are what plants need to make the complex compounds that are in fruits and vegetables.
Mm-hmm.
And if they don't have the right things in the soil, they can't make those complex compounds that are what give fruits and vegetables their unique flavors.
Yeah. That makes sense. Well, John, it's been a pleasure talking with you. Where can people follow you if they want to continue to see what you're doing and learn more about your farm and also the conference in May?
Yeah, so Rogue Food, you can go to roguefoodconference.com. When I checked this morning, I think we only had 13 tickets left. So I might be able to squeeze a few more tickets in there, but if you're interested in going, you don't have time to wait to grab a ticket. So, and then I'm on Gab at Resistance is Fertile. I'm on Facebook. My personal website's John W. Moody, but I never send emails or anything because I'm horrible like that. But come to Rogue, come to County Before Country, catch me somewhere.
Very good. Thanks for coming on and keep up the great work.
Great. Thank you so much for having me, David.